So what is self-reference? I actually call this the self-reference problem. The self-reference problem. The self-reference problem is whenever any kind of formal system, it could be a logical system, it could be a worldview, it could be science as a whole. These are all systems. It could be mathematics, it could be arithmetic. It could be a religion. These are all systems. Whenever one of these systems tries to grasp itself, this creates a self-reference problem. Because usually the function of all these systems is to grasp other things. These systems are like hands, like this hand that I have. I can grasp the camera, I can grasp the light, I can grasp the chair, I can grasp another person with this hand. I can grasp a lot of stuff. But notice, there's a self-reference problem, is that I can't grasp my own hand by using my hand. And why is that? Really contemplate why. This seems kind of obvious and stupid, but it's not. It's extremely fucking profound. So really contemplate this for a year. Every day for a year. Contemplate, why can't my hand grab my own hand? Why? Try it. Why can't it work? What is the profound metaphysical reason for why my hand can't grab my own hand? If you understand this one point, you will understand the entire problem of grasping what consciousness is. How can you use consciousness to grasp consciousness? How can you use mind to grasp mind? And remember, science is mind. Scientists forget this, and rationalists forget this. Rationalists and scientists like to pretend, and skeptics too, like to pretend as though skepticism, rationality, and science are not mind, but that they are somehow outside or prior to mind. They're not. They're mind. You can't have science, skepticism, or rationality without mind. Do you get it? So what's going on here is that mind is trying to grasp reality. That's what science is doing. That's what logic is for. That's what all human knowledge is about. Even if you're doing philosophy, philosophical systems also have a self-reference problem. Because see, for a philosopher, like as a philosopher, what do we want? We want to create some sort of philosophy that explains all of reality, right? But then, of course, if your philosophy is going to explain all of reality, isn't your philosophy part of the reality you're trying to explain? Therefore, your philosophy, by definition, if it's going to explain all of reality, has to also be able to explain itself. Do you see that? And so most philosophers are not conscious of this self-reference problem that exists within all philosophical systems. And therefore, they're not able to properly explain or account for reality. Because you actually can't explain all of reality through a linguistic scheme or through a thought-based scheme of any kind. And there's a very deep reason for that, which we'll get to in a minute. So anyways, mind tries to grasp reality, assuming, notice, there's such a deep implicit assumption just in this attempt to grasp reality. When you're asking the question, like, what is reality? See, you're trying to grasp reality with your mind. Notice that. But also notice that when you're doing that, don't just assume that it's going to be possible. Ask yourself, what are the assumptions just in that process, in that method of grasping reality? When science is reaching out to grasp some corner of reality, it's assuming that the mind or the method of science is separate from the reality that it's trying to grasp. It assumes a duality between these two things, mind and reality, science and reality. That's a distinction. So the mind goes looking for some part of reality that it can use to define itself with. For example, if you ask a scientist, what is mind? the scientists will say, well, of course, mind is just neurons in the brain. But you see, neurons in the brain, what is that? That itself is mind. So how you're defining mind is in a circular manner without noticing that that's what you're doing. You're in denial about the fact that you're doing this, which means you don't actually have a true understanding of what you're doing and what mind is. In order for mind to explain itself, mind has to try to look for something outside of itself to define itself with. So it might say neurons. Neurons are not part of the mind. Neurons are part of the brain. Therefore, this is acceptable. We can define the mind using something outside the mind, which is called a neuron, which is in the brain. And then you can say, well, what defines a brain then? And you can say, well, the brain is defined by atoms, which are not in the brain, but something beyond the brain, like that. See, it's an endless game like this that the scientific mind plays without realizing that that's what it's doing. So notice what's happening here at a metaphysical level is that mind, in order to explain and to define itself, to understand itself, tries to look for something other to itself. But notice what that means. Notice what that assumes. That assumes that there is something other to mind. But consider the possibility that mind is everything. That's a problem. See, you can either assume that there's mind and an other to mind, or you can assume that there's only mind. Science assumes that there's mind and there's something other to mind. Therefore, that's a dualistic paradigm, and in that dualistic paradigm, you can play a sort of a little bit of a game there, try to define mind relative to something other outside the mind. But the problem, of course, is that if the mind keeps looking deeper and further out to its extents, what it realizes is that it can look infinitely far in every direction, and it'll find nothing but itself, more mind. Because the absolute truth is that mind is all that there is. There is no other to mind. Mind is an absolute. And so now, the problem becomes that of the hand grasping itself. If all there exists is the hand, and nothing else to be grasped but the hand, and you're trying to use the hand to grasp the only thing that there is the hand, imagine the hand is everything. How can you use everything to grasp everything? You see, the mind is trying to grasp itself, but it can't define itself against anything other than itself, because itself is the only thing that there exists by definition. So then how can mind grasp mind? Well, it can't. But this is very counterintuitive and tricky, because it might sound like, Leo, so what you're saying is that all of philosophy and science and all this knowledge seeking is all bullshit, it's impossible. And that the answers can't really be arrived at, or all the questions, the deep questions can't really be answered. No, that's not what I'm saying. Leo, you're saying all this is just a bullshit mind game, and it's just all just armchair philosophy and speculative metaphysics, and it's all pointless, and we should stop doing it. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying precisely the opposite of that. The mind cannot grasp itself, but the mind can grasp the fact that it cannot grasp itself, and furthermore, that the mind exists as mind. And that mind is everything. This is a very subtle, nuanced distinction. So, although mind cannot fully know itself, mind can realize that it is being itself. And so the answers that we seek, the deepest answers that we seek, can be reached, but those answers don't exist at the level of logical, symbolic mind. Those answers are so fucking profound, they exist at the level of being. You don't know the answer, you become the answer. You don't know that the mind is infinite. You become infinity. You become infinite mind. Is that making sense? So in a sense, what I'm saying is that self-knowledge is impossible. So you might say, well, that's a very negative point, Leo. It sounds like you're a nihilist. Self-knowledge is impossible. Sure, that's easy to say, and then you don't have to do any work. But I'm saying something much deeper than that. Even though self-knowledge is impossible, self with a capital S is possible. So it turns out that the answers you seek don't exist at the level of self-knowledge because knowledge itself is a second-order feature of consciousness and mind. They exist at a more primordial level, which is at the level of consciousness or direct experience or self or being, which is prior to knowledge.